I'll never forget the day they laughed. It wasn't the kind of laughter that fades after a few seconds. It was cruel, echoing, heavy. The kind that sticks to your memory like a scar. That day, I stood in a room filled with glass walls and confident men in suits, believing my dream finally had a chance. But by the time I walked out, I wasn't sure if I still believed in myself. My name is Arif. A few years ago, I was just another young man with a big idea and a small apartment. No investors, no team, no connections. Just a vision and an old laptop that overheated every time I tried to run my code. My dream was called ByteBridge, a freelance connection platform built for people like me. People from small towns. Talented, hardworking, unseen. I wanted to give them a way to cross that invisible line between potential and opportunity. I still remember the smell of burnt coffee that morning. I barely slept, rehearsing my pitch 100 times in the mirror. I wore my only formal shirt, ironed 3 times to hide the nervous shaking in my hands. That pitch wasn't just about funding. It was about respect. About proving that I mattered. The meeting was at Apex Works, a massive investment firm. I'd somehow managed to book a slot with their partners. When I arrived, I froze because sitting across the conference table were 2 people I never wanted to see again, Rehan and Zubair. They were my seniors back in college. Back then, they ruled every competition, every startup event. They loved making jokes at my expense. Arif and his fantasy app, they used to say. I thought time might have changed them. I was wrong, Arif. Rehan smiled, pretending to sound surprised. Still chasing that bridge dream, huh? Byte, what was it again? ByteBridge, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smirked, leaning back. Right, cute name. I opened my laptop and started presenting. My slides weren't flashy, just numbers, research, and real stories. Stories of young freelancers from small towns struggling to find work. I explained how my platform could connect them directly to clients abroad. I spoke with hope, with fire, because I believed every word. But halfway through, Zubair interrupted. So, you really think someone from a little town can compete with professionals from big cities? I nodded. Talent doesn't come from a zip code. Rehan chuckled. Sure, but funding does. The others in the room laughed with him. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. That quiet, dismissive laughter hit harder than any insult. Zubair leaned forward and said, You know, Arif, you should probably focus on getting some real experience first. Maybe join a company, make some contacts. This idea of yours, it's sweet, but it's too small for the real world. Too small for the real world. Those words sank deep. I stood there, forcing a smile, pretending it didn't hurt. I thanked them for their time, gathered my things, and walked out slowly. But inside, I was crumbling. Outside their glass tower, the city felt colder than ever. I sat on a bench nearby, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from anger. They didn't just reject my idea. They mocked my dream. And that humiliation, it burned. As cars rushed past and office lights flickered across the skyline, something shifted inside me. I realized that waiting for their approval was my biggest mistake. Maybe I didn't need their money. Maybe I just needed their disbelief, because that's when I made a silent promise to myself. I'd build ByteBridge anyway. I'd build it so strong, so real, that one day, even they couldn't ignore it. I whispered it out loud like a vow to the night. They'll remember my name. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But one day, they will. I walked home through the empty streets, feeling the sting of failure and the quiet rise of determination all at once. Every insult they threw at me became a reason to keep going. Every laugh became fuel. In the days that followed, I stopped reaching out to investors. No more pitching. No more waiting for validation. I decided to build alone if I had to. If the world wasn't ready for my dream, then I'd make it ready. That night replayed in my head over and over again. Rehan's smirk. Zubair's mocking tone. The laughter in that room. At first, it hurt. Then it hardened me. They thought I was finished. That I'd give up like so many others who tried and failed. But I knew something they didn't. Every time someone laughs at a dreamer, they plant a seed, one that grows quietly in the dark until it's strong enough to break through the ground. So, when I tell you I'll never forget that day, it's not because it broke me. It's because it built me. They thought they'd buried me. But they just planted a seed. I learned to live by alarms. One told me when to start freelancing at dawn. Another reminded me to switch back to ByteBridge at night. I wrote code for clients to pay rent, then wrote code for my dream to keep it alive. Days blurred into each other like pages flipping too fast. I wasn't chasing sleep anymore. I was chasing time. I couldn't do it alone. Nadia joined first. She was a designer with a steady hand and a kinder heart. She didn't ask for a salary. She asked for a promise. If this helps someone in a small town find real work, she said, I'm in. Rafik came next. A developer who loved puzzles more than people, but he believed in the build. He showed up with a backpack, an old keyboard, and a look that said, tell me where to start. We made our office wherever the lights stayed on. A cafe that let us sit after closing. A co-working space that forgot to charge us on weekends. A corner table in a library that became ours by habit. Our laptops were tired, our chargers were frayed, and every cable felt like a lifeline. The baristas learned our names. The security guards nodded when we dragged our bags out at midnight. We were not important, but we were consistent.
There were nights when the code refused to behave. The app would freeze at the worst possible moment, or a form would erase itself after a long submission, and I'd feel the floor drop under my feet. Nadia would slide a sketch across the table. Breathe, she'd whisper. This screen will be someone's first hope. Make it simple. Rafik would crack his knuckles and say, I'll refactor the whole module if I have to. Let's not ship stress. Let's ship trust. We didn't have money for big tools, so we built with what we had. We used open source libraries, wrote our own fixes, and learned to love the long way around. We tested with friends of friends, tailors, teachers, students, anyone who had a skill but no stage. They sent us messages that warmed our tired eyes. I got my first online gig from a client in another country. I finally paid my college fee without asking anyone. You made me feel seen. Those notes were our fuel. ByteBridge launched quietly on a Tuesday. No ribbon cutting. No headline. Just a button that finally worked and a server waiting like a held breath. Our first week brought 12 users. The next week, 43. Then 107. The numbers weren't huge, but they were ours. We celebrated with tea in paper cups. Nadia drew a tiny bridge on a napkin and dated it. Rafik said nothing, he just smiled for once. The small wins changed our posture. We sat taller, spoke clearer, laughed more. I caught myself imagining the future, mentorship spaces, trusted reviews, fair rates for first-timers. We didn't want to be a marketplace. We wanted to be a path. For the first time since that awful meeting at Apex Works, I felt something like peace. Then the storm came. Apex Works threw a launch party so big you could hear it from our side of the city. Their new app, sleek, loud, polished, looked suspiciously familiar. Their demo showed features we had built, design choices we had argued over for weeks, even terms we had coined in our documents. They called it the future of freelance tech. Influencers repeated the line until it sounded like a prophecy. Overnight, our sign-ups slowed. Some users wrote to us, apologetic and torn. They have more projects. They have better ads. Should we move? Watching those messages felt like standing on a shore while the tide pulled everything away. I stared at the dashboard as the little green dots turned gray. It hurt in a way I can't dress up. It felt like I was back in that glass room with the laughter on loop. Nadia looked stunned. They took our idea, she said, voice shaking. They just took it. Rafiq slammed his palm on the table, then closed his eyes like he regretted it. We can't fight their money, he muttered. We don't have PR. We barely have working chargers. I didn't speak for a while. I watched the download count stall, the curve flatten. I swallowed the old shame, the old anger, and I let silence force me to choose. When I finally spoke, the words felt heavier than my fear. They can copy the code, I said softly, not the conviction. The room went still. Nadia held my gaze, searching. Rafiq's jaw loosened. We don't compete with their noise, I added. We compete with their blind spots. We went back to the whiteboard. We erased the parts that looked like everyone else and circled the parts that felt like us. We asked our users what made them stay. They didn't say, slick design, or big brand. They said safety. They said guidance. They said respect. So we built for that. We added guided profiles that told a person's story, not just their skills, where they learned, who taught them, who they wanted to help. We added a first project guarantee where clients pledged mentorship, not just payment, short calls to set expectations, templates for feedback, a promise to review work with patience. We built a rating system that measured reliability, clarity, and kindness, not just completion rates. Behind the scenes, we wrote tools that spotted unfair offers and flagged them before they reached a new user. We created a practice board where beginners could try real tasks with fake stakes, no shame, just learning. We set up a bridge call every Friday where I, or Nadia, or Rafiq would meet a few new users over video, welcome them, and answer questions. It wasn't scalable. It was sincere. That was the point. And we stopped chasing investors entirely. We wrote a small note on our homepage, built by people who remember their first job, * we meant it. We pushed updates quietly. No fireworks. Only better bridges. The messages started coming back. I stayed because your mentor called me by my name. Your practice task made me brave enough to apply for a real one. A client taught me how to write my first proposal. I cried after the call, but I sent it, and I got hired. These weren't vanity metrics. These were lives opening. Apex Works kept scaling. Their banners got brighter. Their campaigns got bigger. But I could feel the gap. They sold a ladder. We laid a path. The difference was subtle until it wasn't. I still had moments of doubt. At 2 in the morning, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if goodness could outrun volume, if care could outrun cash. Then I'd remember the day they laughed, and the vow I made on that cold bench outside their tower. I didn't build ByteBridge to win headlines. I built it to make the quiet ones louder. We kept moving. We fixed what broke, learned from what hurt, and tried again. We shipped trust. We shipped hope. And piece by piece, ByteBridge began to feel less like an app and more like a promise kept. They had power. I had purpose. Guess which one lasts longer? You have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan. Success doesn't always arrive with celebration. Sometimes, it sneaks in quietly, one new user, one kind review, one hopeful email at a time. That's how ByteBridge began to breathe again. After months of silence, the numbers started climbing. Slowly. Carefully. We were back on the map, but not enough to draw attention, or so I thought. Then, strange things started happening. Every time we prepared to launch a new feature, ApexWorks released something eerily similar, sometimes within days, sometimes within hours. At first, I brushed it off as coincidence. Maybe they had a team watching the market. Maybe luck was just cruel. But it kept happening. Our new skill verification system, they launched theirs 2 days before us. Our redesigned homepage, theirs appeared with the same layout a week later. Even our campaign slogan, "Real Skills, Real Stories," was suddenly plastered all over their ads. I remember staring at the screen one night, heart pounding, realizing something wasn't right. It wasn't just bad luck anymore. Someone was feeding them our plans. The thought made my chest tighten. I looked around our small workspace, the same cafe corner that had seen our rise from nothing. Nadia was sketching UI designs, humming softly. Rafiq was focused on code, tapping keys with that familiar rhythm. I wanted to believe it couldn't be either of them. We were family. At least, I thought we were. Days passed, and the tension thickened. Every new idea felt risky, every shared file felt exposed. I started double-checking everything, passwords, updates, even the meeting notes. Nadia noticed. "Arif, you're different," she said one night. "You don't trust us anymore, do you?" I forced a smile. "It's not that. I just need to be careful." But the truth was, trust was slipping through my fingers. Then came the night everything cracked. We were preparing a quiet beta for a new AI-based matching tool, something that could completely change how freelancers found jobs. Only 3 people knew about it, me, Nadia, and... The next morning, Apex announced the exact same thing, down to the name. I felt the world tilt. My hands went cold. I didn't need proof. I already knew. I walked into the cafe early, before the others arrived. The morning light cut through the blinds, falling across our messy table, coffee cups, empty snack wrappers, code scribbles on napkins. It looked like a battlefield. When Rafiq walked in, I didn't greet him. He looked tired, eyes red, shoulders heavy. He knew why I'd called him early. "Rafiq," I said quietly, how much did they pay you? He froze. His lips parted, but no words came. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The silence was enough. After a long pause, he whispered, I didn't mean for it to hurt us. I just needed the money. My father's treatment. I closed my eyes. For a second, I wanted to understand. I really did. But then I remembered all those nights we shared, coding under flickering lights, eating cheap noodles, dreaming big. You didn't sell data, Rafiq, I said softly. You sold trust. The words hung heavy in the air. He looked down, ashamed, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry, he muttered. I thought I could fix it before it reached you. I thought. I stopped him. It's done. He packed his bag slowly, his hands trembling. Before leaving, he turned once, like he wanted to say something more. But he didn't. He just walked away. The door closed, and with it, a part of me closed too. That night, I sat alone, surrounded by the quiet hum of computers. Nadia came by later, holding 2 cups of tea. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew. I keep wondering, I said, staring at the screen, what's the point of building bridges when people just burn them? She sat beside me, calm as ever. You don't stop building bridges because one broke, she said. You build stronger ones. Her words cut through the fog in my head. Maybe she was right. Maybe betrayal wasn't the end, maybe it was the test. That night, something in me shifted again. I stopped seeing us as dreamers and started thinking like a strategist. Trust had been broken once, it wouldn't happen again. I tightened every access point, rewrote core systems, and rebuilt our internal framework from the ground up. We encrypted files, split development modules, and documented nothing that could leak our next move. I became quiet, colder, perhaps, but sharper. ByteBridge wouldn't just survive this. It would learn from it. And when the time came, Apex would face the version of us they never saw coming. I looked at the empty chair where Rafiq once sat. His betrayal had hurt, but it had also taught me something brutal and valuable. Loyalty isn't about being in the same room. It's about believing in the same future. That night, I stopped playing defense. It was time to plan my move. Some turning points arrive like storms, loud and violent. But mine came quietly, in the form of a single email. I was sitting in our small workspace one late evening, watching the rain through the glass, when the notification popped up on my screen. The sender's name read, Eleanor Walsh. I almost ignored it. Spam, maybe. Investors didn't reach out to small founders like me. But the subject line made my pulse stop for a second. Your platform moved me. I opened it. Eleanor introduced herself, a global investor, known for finding purpose-driven startups. She'd read about ByteBridge in a small online feature. Her words still echo in my head. You built something rare, Arif. A product with a heartbeat. You're helping the unseen become visible. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After everything, the humiliation, the betrayal, the struggle, someone finally saw what we were trying to do. Not the numbers. Not the charts. But the heart. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Then I took a deep breath and typed back. Thank you for seeing us. Let's talk. That conversation changed everything. Eleanor believed in impact over image. She didn't ask about past failures, she asked about future goals. She listened, not as an investor checking boxes, but as a believer who understood the power of second chances. But I was careful, very careful. Apex Works still had eyes everywhere. If they even suspected that ByteBridge was rising again, they'd find a way to crush it. So, I made a decision that would redefine my path. I created a new holding company, ByteBridge Inc. It was my mask. My protection. My silent strategy. Eleanor never knew that ByteBridge was my creation, or that it quietly owned ByteBridge. Through this new name, I negotiated funding, signed new developers, and expanded our reach, all while keeping my past hidden in the shadows. When the deal went through, I stood in the same small cafe where it all began. I didn't shout. I didn't celebrate. I just closed my eyes and whispered. We're not done yet. The funds allowed us to rebuild from the ground up. We hired a new team, passionate dreamers from small towns, just like the people we wanted to help. Nadia took charge of design and user experience, creating interfaces that spoke with emotion, not just function. Every meeting felt different now, calmer, more focused. We weren't begging for approval anymore. We were building quietly, deliberately. Within months, ByteBridge began thriving again, this time on an international scale. Users from Europe, Africa, and Asia started joining. Clients praised the platform's authenticity and fairness. The bridge was finally extending across borders. I still kept my distance from the spotlight. I didn't attend conferences. I didn't give interviews. When asked about ByteBridge, I'd simply say, just a team that believes in invisible talent. And while we grew, Apex Works started to stumble. They had expanded too fast, chasing numbers instead of purpose. Their flashy campaigns burned cash, their internal politics grew toxic. Rumors spread, unpaid vendors, unhappy employees, a CEO under pressure. I didn't take joy in their fall, not at first. But I couldn't ignore the irony. The same company that once laughed at my tiny dream was now sinking under its own arrogance. Every few weeks, I'd come across headlines: Apex Works faces layoffs, Apex's market share declines, investors question leadership. Each one felt like a quiet echo of justice. Still, I kept my silence. Revenge doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers, and waits for the right echo. Eleanor remained my strongest ally. She often praised the progress of ByteBridge, unaware of the personal story behind it. To her, I was just a determined founder rebuilding a hopeful company. To me, she was the bridge that carried me from humiliation to control. Whenever she'd say, "You're doing incredible work, Arif," I'd nod and smile, keeping the truth locked behind my calm expression. Because this wasn't the time to reveal anything. This was the time to prepare. Nadia once asked me, do you ever miss the old days? When we worked with no investors, no titles, just hope. I smiled faintly. I miss the simplicity, I said. But not the silence. We were unheard then. Now, they'll have to listen. ByteBridge grew, not as a comeback story, but as a quiet revolution. We didn't fight Apex with money, we fought them with meaning. And meaning, I learned, lasts longer than marketing. Then one morning, a headline caught my eye. Apex Works faces major debt crisis, investors pull out. I stared at it for a long time, sipping my tea, letting the words sink in. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just felt an odd calmness spread through me. Because for the first time in years, I realized, the tables were turning. The empire that mocked me was cracking from within. They just hadn't heard it yet. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it moves like a whisper, quiet, precise, impossible to trace. By the time Apex Works realized they were drowning, it was already too late. Their numbers were slipping. Their investors were leaving. Their once proud name, the one that used to appear in every business magazine, had turned into a headline for failure. And me? I was watching it all unfold from a distance. Calm. Focused. Patient. Their empire was cracking, and I was already holding the blueprint for what came next. Apex began searching for a buyer, anyone willing to rescue them. They dressed it up as a strategic partnership, but everyone knew it was a desperate plea for survival. Inside their offices, panic had replaced pride. Rayhan and Zubair, the same men who once laughed in my face, were now scrambling for meetings, pitching to anyone who would listen. What they didn't know was that one of those interested buyers was me. Not as Arif, the kid they mocked, but as ByteBridge Incorporated, the quiet holding company they'd never heard of. Through intermediaries and corporate lawyers, I placed a silent bid. Clean. Professional. Untraceable. Nobody suspected a thing. The documents were signed by a firm that didn't even carry my name. Every move went through layers of paperwork, every communication filtered through neutral parties. I made sure of one thing, no one connected the dots between ByteBridge and ByteBridge. The irony was almost poetic. They believed they were being saved. In truth, they were walking right into the arms of the very man they'd once humiliated. As the negotiations began, I stayed in the background. Every time they met the representatives from ByteBridge, I watched from behind tinted glass. I could see them, Rayhan, still overconfident, Zubair, still pretending to be in control. They had no idea who was sitting on the other side of that mirrored wall. And as I listened to them bargain, twist, and flatter, a single thought repeated in my mind. The same hands that mocked me are now signing their surrender. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something deeper, justice, maybe. A quiet satisfaction that words could never describe. Days turned into weeks. The deal inched forward through endless calls, documents, and signatures. Lawyers debated clauses, accountants reviewed numbers, and I stayed silent through it all, letting the system deliver what pride never could. There was a moment, during one of the final meetings, that stayed with me. Rayhan leaned back in his chair, smirking slightly, saying to the ByteBridge team, "We've been through tough times before. Whoever buys us will be lucky to have our brand name attached to their portfolio." I almost laughed. Lucky? They had no idea they were being bought by the very small dreamer they once mocked. The process moved faster than expected. Apex Works had debts piling up, and ByteBridge's offer looked like a miracle. In the news, headlines began to speculate: anonymous holding firm I's acquisition of Apex Works. Analysts praised the potential strategic revival. But none of them knew the truth. It wasn't strategy. It was closure. When the final signatures were due, I decided to attend one meeting in person. Not as Arif, but as the anonymous executive behind ByteBridge. I wore a simple suit, no name tag, no introduction. As I entered the conference room, Rayhan glanced at me but didn't recognize me. Years had changed me, the beard, the calm posture, the silence. He smiled politely and continued signing the documents, unaware that his pen was closing the circle of his own arrogance. The sound of each signature felt like a heartbeat, steady, final. And when the last page was signed, the lawyer announced it formally. Apex Works is now officially acquired by ByteBridge Incorporated. I thanked everyone, shook hands, and walked out quietly. No victory speech. No dramatic reveal. Just the echo of footsteps down the hallway of the company that once laughed me out of a room. Later that night, the press release went live. ByteBridge, under ByteBridge Holdings, acquires Apex Works in a strategic merger. When Rayhan and Zubair saw the headline, I can only imagine their faces. Their arrogance must have melted into disbelief. The very startup they had dismissed as too small for the real world now owned them, legally, publicly, completely. I didn't need to see their reactions to know the impact. Because sometimes, silence speaks louder than any confrontation. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker across the skyline. There was no noise. No cheering. Just a deep, quiet peace. For years, I'd carried the weight of their laughter. Now, that laughter was gone, replaced by the sound of signatures, the whisper of paper, and the quiet triumph of patience. They thought power was about speaking the loudest. But real power is knowing when to stay silent, and let the world catch up to your truth. The papers were signed. The laughter finally stopped. The room was buzzing long before I walked in. Reporters filled every corner. Cameras clicked like 1,000 heartbeats. Bright lights flooded the stage, but I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I'd waited years for this moment. And now, it had arrived. The massive screen behind me displayed the words. ByteBridge Incorporated announces global merger with Apex Works. The air felt electric. Everyone wanted to see who the mysterious founder behind ByteBridge really was. No one suspected that the quiet boy they once mocked, the one who walked out of their office humiliated, would be standing here today, not as a dreamer, but as the owner. I stepped onto the stage slowly, in a clean black suit. No extravagance. No arrogance. Just calm confidence. The lights hit my face, and for a second, I could see the reflection of my past, the cafe nights, the betrayal, the laughter, the pain. I looked down and spotted them in the front row, Rayhan and Zubair. The once proud founders of Apex Works. They sat frozen, whispering to each other, faces pale under the flashing lights. They didn't need introductions. And I didn't need an explanation. The truth was already written across their eyes. The host invited me to speak. I took the mic, adjusted it slightly, and let the silence linger just long enough for everyone to feel it. Good evening, I began. I know many of you are wondering who I am. My name is Arif, founder of ByteBridge, now part of NovaBridge Incorporated. A murmur swept across the crowd. Reporters leaned forward. Flashbulbs exploded. I could see Rayhan's jaw tighten, Zubair's hands clasping nervously. A few years ago, I continued, I walked into a room with a simple idea, to connect unseen talent with unseen opportunity. I was told my dream was too small, too naive, too unrealistic. My voice didn't shake. It was steady, deliberate, the tone of someone who'd already made peace with his past. They laughed, I said, pausing. And honestly, I don't blame them. Because sometimes, it takes time for people to recognize what they can't yet imagine. The room went completely silent. You could hear camera shutters stop mid-click. I smiled slightly, looked right at Rayhan and Zubair, and said. They said small dreams don't matter. But maybe small dreams, when nurtured long enough, grow bigger than ego. The audience erupted in applause. Not the polite kind, the kind that rises from the gut. Even some of Apex's old employees stood up, clapping through tears. Rayhan looked down, avoiding my eyes. Zubair tried to smile, but it faded instantly. For once, they had no words, and I had no anger left. Today, I went on, this isn't about revenge. It's about remembrance. For every dreamer who was told they were too small to matter. For every person who was mocked, ignored, or doubted. I want this merger to remind them, the world changes when the quiet ones refuse to give up. Behind me, the big screen lit up with a montage. Footage of ByteBridge's early days, the cafe tables, Nadia's sketches, Rafiq's code, our first users smiling in grainy video calls. I felt my throat tighten as I watched it play. The audience clapped again, but this time it was softer, more emotional. This wasn't just a corporate announcement. It was the closing of a story that began with humiliation and ended with redemption. I ended my speech simply. We're not here to destroy what others built. We're here to rebuild what others broke. Belief. Thank you. I placed the mic down and stepped back. No dramatic music. No flashing words. Just a standing ovation that grew louder and louder until the hall vibrated. As I walked off stage, I caught one last glimpse of Rayhan. His head was bowed, his eyes glistening with something I couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Outside, the cool evening air felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. Nadia joined me by the entrance, smiling. You finally said it, she whispered. You closed the circle. I nodded. Not closed, I said quietly. Completed. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace, the kind that comes when you stop running from the past and start walking toward purpose. Still, as I looked out over the city skyline, a question lingered in my mind, one that wouldn't leave easily. All this time, all this struggle, what had it cost me? The crowd inside kept cheering, the cameras kept flashing, but I could barely hear them. Because deep down, I knew the story wasn't just about triumph. It was also about the price of holding on, and the loneliness that sometimes comes with winning quietly. The papers were signed. The applause was loud. The laughter had finally stopped. But in that silence, I realized something else had started: reflection. Revenge complete, but what did it cost? The crowd was gone. The cameras were off. The applause had faded into memory. And for the first time in years, there was silence. I found myself back where it all began, in my old apartment. The same cracked walls, the same flickering light bulb, the same window that once showed me a city full of dreams I couldn't reach. Everything felt smaller now. Or maybe I'd just grown. I sat by the corner table, the one that used to serve as my office, dining table, and bed when I worked through the night. On it sat my first laptop, the same old, cracked one that overheated after every few hours. I had taped the edges once to keep it from falling apart. Now it sat quietly, like an old friend that had witnessed everything, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, the rebuilding, and finally, the victory. I ran my fingers across the keyboard. The keys still carried the faint scratches of those long nights when I typed through tears, through frustration, through hope. That laptop wasn't just a machine. It was a memory. A reminder of where I began, and how far I'd come. For a long while, I just sat there, no noise, no calls, no deadlines. Just me and the sound of my own breathing. I always thought victory would feel loud, like cheering crowds, flashing lights, endless applause. But it didn't. It felt quiet. Still. Almost peaceful. I whispered to myself. I thought victory would taste sweet. But it tasted quiet. Because real revenge isn't about making others lose. It's about never quitting on yourself. For years, I had chased the moment when Rayhan and Zubair would finally see me win. And they did. But the truth was, that moment wasn't the real victory. The real victory was sitting right here, in this room, still holding on to my dream after everything that tried to destroy it. Because revenge fades. But purpose endures. I smiled, thinking of everyone who had been part of that journey. Nadia, who never stopped believing. And even Rafiq, the one who broke my trust when it mattered most. A few months after the merger, Rafiq reached out. He sounded nervous, ashamed. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he just wanted to thank me for giving him his start. I could have ignored him. I could have stayed bitter. But I didn't. I met him for coffee at the same cafe where we'd once built ByteBridge. He looked older, tired, like someone carrying too many regrets. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about beginnings, mistakes, and lessons. Before leaving, I said, "You don't need my forgiveness, Rafik. You already learned the hardest way. But if you ever want to build again, build with honesty this time." He nodded, and that was enough. Later, I brought him back, quietly, without an announcement, to work on a mentorship project for young coders. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing not to let the pain define what comes next. That's the thing about revenge, it's never really about others. It's about reclaiming yourself. And when you finally do, you realize the people who doubted you were never the enemy. Your own fear was. I looked out the window again, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Each one of those lights represented someone's dream, small, fragile, but burning anyway. And I thought about every person out there who might be hearing my story one day. Every dreamer sitting in a small room, surrounded by doubt, wondering if it's even worth trying. I wanted to tell them this. If they laugh at your dream, don't fight back. Don't waste your energy proving them wrong. Just keep building, quietly, patiently. Because one day, your silence will speak louder than their noise. Dreams don't need approval to grow. They just need belief, even if that belief comes from one tired, sleepless heart sitting in front of an old laptop. I smiled again, this time without bitterness. The weight I carried for so long had Fina. Not because I'd won, but because I'd learned what winning truly meant. It wasn't about taking revenge. It was about finding peace. And peace doesn't come from breaking others. It comes from rebuilding yourself. As I stood up to leave, I took one last look at the cracked laptop. The reflection of the city lights shimmered across its screen, almost like it was alive again. And I whispered softly, "We did it." Then I turned off the light, closed the door, and walked away, not from the past, but toward everything the future still had to offer. Because ByteBridge was never built from money or luck. It was built from rejection. Powered by belief. And that was always the real story. And that was my story. A story of rejection, belief, and quiet revenge. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because one day, your silence might speak louder than their laughter. ByteBridge, built from rejection, powered by belief.